recording. This is tape 2. We talked about your family and growing up the other day, and that would start with school today. So, do you have any memories of your first day going into first grade? Were you excited, scared?
Probably apprehensive. Stell, my older sister, walked me to school, and I don't think I was scared. I just didn't, because it was meeting new people and new kids and everything. So I wasn't too keen on that. But you do what you have to do.
What was the name of your school?
Chestnut Hill School. And it had 4 grades, 2 rooms. First and second grade in one room, and third and fourth grade in the other room. There were 2 teachers, one in each room.
About how many kids? Any idea?
What would there be in a normal classroom? About 30 chairs, maybe? So that was probably it. So there'd probably be about 15 to 20 kids in each grade.
Okay. So you walked to school?
Walked to school.
With Stell all the time, or just that first day?
No, just that first day.
So everybody had their own desk?
Yeah. And we had a cloakroom. So when you go in, there was a little room along one wall, like where everybody had a hanger, something like what Meg has. And everybody had their own hook where they would hang their own jacket. That's about all.
Did you have like recess at school? Were there any particular games that you played?
We had recess. We played, depending upon the season, we played marbles. We played hopscotch. Was when we'd go out with a group, we'd play like kickball and that kind of games.
Was there a swing set there?
No.
Did you like school? Were there certain things you enjoyed or certain things you didn't like?
Excuse me. I liked school all right. I didn't like my first grade teacher. She was, well, I thought kind of nasty. She probably wasn't, but she yelled a lot, and I wasn't used to that. But otherwise, it was nice. It was fun, I guess, in its own way.
How were you disciplined?
How were we disciplined? Had to sit in a corner. If we were naughty, we had to sit in a corner. She'd put a dunce cap on our head. And that's probably why I didn't like her. But it wasn't a case of getting a bad mark or anything. It was just that she sort of embarrassed you in front of the other kids. And if you were sensitive at all, which I was at that age, you didn't like that.
Yep.
So.
How did your 3rd and 4th grade teacher handle disciplining differently?
Yes, I don't know, maybe it was because I didn't do anything in the 3rd and 4th grade to be disciplined for. But she was nice. I liked her. And I didn't seem to have any problems with her.
How about the schoolwork itself? Did you find it easy or hard or?
I don't know. In the very beginning, I had trouble with my colors. And that was why I had trouble with the teacher. Because I would color something wrong, and she thought I was doing it on purpose.
Like the wrong color or outside the lines?
No,
or-
the wrong color. And like I might make a chimney, instead of making it red, I might make it green or something like that. And she thought I was doing that to be funny. And I wasn't. I didn't know the difference. But once I got over that, I didn't seem to have any. I didn't cause disciplinary problems. I just caused problems as far as work was concerned that she didn't go for.
And you mentioned that you walked to school. Did you walk with a group of kids or by yourself?
Afterwards, we would meet at the top of my street, whatever kids lived in the neighborhood, and we had to wait there until the policeman came to cross us. And sometimes he was there by the time we got there, and other times we had to wait for him, which made us late for school. And the teacher wasn't thrilled about that. But we really would get into trouble if we crossed before he came.
Yep.
So,
Do you remember summers when there weren't school? When you were in elementary grades, do you remember what you did?
there were 3 or 4 kids that I would play with, and there was a woods across the street from my house, and we would play in there. We would climb trees, and I remember at one point we'd take a lunch, and we'd climb up this tree, and we'd tie our lunch bag onto a branch of the tree, and we'd watch for the trains to go by up in the square. Then we'd play hide and seek and things like that. We played marbles. And
Did you have a lot of marbles?
yeah, I did, as a matter of fact. Most of the time they were the clay marbles, and then gradually somebody would get some glassies, but those came along later. And so I'd try to win a few of those, but they didn't come along until later.
Did boys and girls play together? Or were you mostly playing with other
Yeah,
girls?
in the neighborhood,
Mhm.
because there weren't that many kids that you could say, well, I'm only going to play with girls, or I'm only going to play with boys.
How about lunch? Did you bring your lunch every day?
Yes.
Did you sit at your desk or did you go somewhere to eat?
No, there was no other place. Not in that school. There was no other place. So we sat at our desks and we ate. And then when we were all through, we could go outside and play. It was pretty segregated, actually, because the part of the playground around the school that was for like the 1st and 2nd grades were on one side, and the 3rd and 4th were on the other, so that the older kids, old at that point, were separated from the 1st and 2nd graders, which was probably a good idea at its time. And there was a fence around the schoolyard.
So that was through 4th grade. Where did you go from there?
After that, I went to the Highland Street School, on Summer Avenue for the 5th and 6th grade. That was the first time that we moved from class to class. And which was kind of different, kind of exciting in its way. We would move maybe 2 doors down to a teacher who taught us penmanship. And then maybe we'd move across the hall to a teacher who taught us English. And things like that. And then eventually we'd go back to our own room, and we would have classes. We would have classes with our homeroom teacher too, at some point along the line. But there again, we had lunch in our classroom. And then we could go out and play in the playground.
Did that playground have swings or?
No, it didn't. It didn't have swings. It had quite an area to play with, and to play in, and we played a lot of group games and things, but no, we didn't have swings and that kind of thing.
Were you still walking to school at this point?
No, we went by bus.
What was that like? Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I enjoyed it, but some of the kids were a real nuisance. And I'm not being sarcastic about that. It's just that we had a bunch of boys that would like throw things and that kind of thing. And so for the most part it was fine, but not necessarily all of it.
Do you have any recollection of like your earliest friends from elementary school?
Oh, that's what I mentioned, Helen. I had one, her name was Helen Crane. She was an adopted girl, and her father had an oil company and used to make deliveries to my house and a lot of other places. She was a little older than I was, but she was nice, and we used to do a lot of the same things. I'd walk. She lived down the street where the toy store is on the corner. She lived on that street, down a little ways. And so, which wasn't too far from my house, so I would either walk up to hers or she would walk down to mine, and we would do something from there. We would go on walks up through the woods, because on the other end of the woods would be her street. I don't remember too much else of what we did, except we would walk to the center.
What was there?
The stores, Grant's, the 5 and 10, Torrey's ice cream shop, Banks, the usual.
Yep.
That's it.
So are there any other memories you have of the Highland Street School?
No, I told you I liked the school, and I liked most of the teachers, and I think I liked it more because for the first time there were more kids. We had a little bit more freedom while we were outside than we did in the lower grades. And we could go for walks. We couldn't go off the school grounds, but we could do things by ourselves in the playground. And that was interesting. And the teachers were more interesting too than the lower grade ones.
So we've been through 6th grade. Where did you go after that?
The junior high school was called the Walter S. Parker Junior High School, and we had a song for that, for football games. And that was the 7th, 8th, and 9th. I went there by bus. We had a different teacher for every subject. It was a school with 2 floors, and we had hall monitors so that if anyone stepped out of line, they were in trouble.
Were you ever a hall monitor?
No.
No.
I wasn't a lot of things in school. I don't think I pushed myself enough, you know, the way a lot of kids do. And so therefore I was sort of passed by the boards. And junior high school was the first school that I had been to that they had an assembly hall. They had a stage, and we would, and all these chairs and things, and we would go to assemblies because the teachers wanted to discuss something, or every once in a while they would put on a little skit, or a certain room, maybe the science room would put on a skit or something like that. But those were enjoyable.
Do you remember ever participating in one, or were you always in the audience?
I was always in the audience. See, I'm a very dull person.
No. Did you meet any new friends?
Oh, that's another thing. North Reading School came down to go to our school.
Oh, really?
They, in junior high and in high school, they didn't have those at North Reading at the time, so they came to ours. They were bused down. So we met a lot of new kids.
Okay.
I liked a lot of the North Reading kids and got to be quite friendly with some of them.
Did you get to see them a lot outside of school, or were they mostly just your friends during school time?
Mostly during school time, but once in a while I would meet someone and that didn't live too far away. Because see, I lived quite away from the center, so that anyone from up the other way, it would be a long walk for them down.
Right.
We didn't see each other too much outside of school, but they were a whole new element as far as school was concerned. And it was good. I liked it. And they did too.
Did you meet new people within Reading as well?
Yes, because in the elementary school, it was mostly kids from our area. And when we got to junior high, then it was all over the town, so that there were a lot of kids from different areas. Like, I didn't get to meet Mill until junior high.
That's that's Mill Bennett.
Yes. Because she went to a different elementary school. She went to a center school, and I went to the Chestnut,
Chestnut Hill was the younger one.
Younger one. Okay.
We've already talked about that.
All
So.
right. Okay.
Were you friends with Mill right away in junior high?
Not right off the bat, because she had different friends from the elementary school that she had gone to. But then once we started, we realized that we lived closer together so that we could get together to do things like go to a movie or something like that. Then we got to be friendlier.
Were there subjects that you enjoyed? Did you find school easy or hard? Did you like it? Were you happy when the weekends came along?
We're in junior high.
Yep.
I wasn't particularly thrilled, I guess, with school.
Mm-hmm.
I got along all right. I got average grades, some better than others, but I wasn't a top of the class student. When we were in junior high, we could take a couple of electives, I think. One was art.
Did you like art?
Yes. And I think one was language. You could take either French or Latin or something like that. I didn't take those.
Did they have like cooking or sewing or construction or anything like that?
Oh, yes. I was going to forget about that. Yeah, we had, I don't know, did they call it home ec? I guess they called it home ec. And for half the year you had sewing, and for the other half you had cooking. The boys could take shop. Well, they could take one of those, but most of them took the shop. Yeah, and we made things like cornbread and poached eggs. And for sewing, the first thing we had to make was an apron that we had to wear for cooking.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to forget about that.
Did you enjoy those?
Yeah, I liked that a lot. It worked out well.
Let's talk a little bit about high school, and then we'll kind of look at junior high and high school together. Tell me about high school. There was just one in town, right?
There was just one in town. It was 3 grades, 10, 11, and 12. And I had to walk to school because they didn't provide buses for us. The only ones that were bused were the ones from North Reading who came down. They were allowed to be bused, but the rest of us had to walk. And so I would walk down to Mills, pick her up, and we would walk to high school together. What else can I tell you about high school? It was a fairly good-sized school. And there again we had different teachers that taught different subjects.
Did you have lockers in high school?
Yes, we did. Yeah. Gosh, you're good at remembering these things. Yeah, we had lockers. We had, the school had a basement where we had gym classes down in the basement. And also, during the cafeteria was down in the basement. After lunch was cleared away, we could dance in the gym. And then normal classes on the 2nd and 3rd floor. First, well, I guess there were a few on the 1st floor, but mostly it was like the principal's office and a few classrooms that were like specialized, like special ed kind of thing, that kind of thing. Most of the classes were on the 2nd and 3rd floor. There again we had an assembly hall with a stage and all this kind of stuff. And we had, if you wanted to take a musical instrument, they had bands and things like that.
Did you ever take a musical instrument?
No. Told you I was very dull. But we had good teachers, and we had good classes, like good history classes and science classes, where we did our science lab was fairly large, and we could do experiments and things, which seemed like a lot for us. And we had, what did we have? Boy, they really taught penmanship. Because we had it in high school, too.
Wow, all the way up?
All the way up.
What?
And she was a bugger. We used to have to do those exercises, the circles, and you never did that. Oh, yeah, we had to do circles, and it would go on and on and on and on. And then we had to do the up and down, those kind of things. I could show you how to do them, but you never had to. It's amazing how you kids learn to write. Really.
Some better than others, yes.
Some better than others. And we had.
Did you take any typing or other secretarial type classes then?
When we got into high school, we took electives,
Okay.
and I took the business course because that's what I was going to graduate with, was business, and so I took shorthand and typing. Other ones who were taking the college course would take a language. I don't know what else they took, but I could tell if I pulled out my graduation certificate. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to forget about that.
You mentioned some other people that you became friendly with in high school. I think you're saying Evie and somebody else.
Evelyn McLeod and Mary Bronk were two. There were a lot of others that became casual friends, but those I was closer to than most of the others. And
were the two of them and you and Mill like all friends together, or were you individual friends? Were you a group of friends?
Actually, I was friends with Evie and Mary. And Mill didn't want to be friends with Mary. She didn't care for Mary. Mary had a boyfriend, and this bothered Mill. And so if I was doing something with Mary, Mill wouldn't go along. And Mary would have, but if I was doing something with Mill, she didn't want Mary to come along. But I enjoyed both groups, know, and of course, Mary, Mill lived closer, so it was easier to get together with her.
Yep.
Of the two, Mary and Evelyn, I was a little closer to Evelyn, and she would sometimes walk from her house, which was up on Grove Street. I can show you where that is in town. And she would walk down to the center, and I would walk up to the center, and we would meet there. And then we would either go to the library or go and get a soda or something like that. And then when it was time to go, she would go home her way, and I would go home my way. So, and then, is there any more about high school?
Yep. Where did people hang out?
On the library wall.
Really?
Yes. There's around the library, there's probably maybe a 4-foot wall.
Mhm.
And so after school, if we weren't going right home, we would go and sit on the wall, and then we'd see everybody that came by.
Yep.
So, and if we had money, we'd go to Torrey's, which was an ice cream place in the center of town, and get an ice cream. That's about it.
When did kids typically start to date? How old were they?
I would assume, and I don't know this firsthand, but I would assume that a lot of them dated in high school. I didn't.
You mentioned that Mary had a boyfriend.
Mary had a boyfriend, but he lived next door. And so they went out together. He was a little older, and when he got a license, they could go to the beach and things like that.
Yeah.
But Evelyn didn't date, and Mill didn't date, and I didn't date. Most of my group didn't date, but a lot of the popular kids did.
Yep.
And they had places to go and things to do. So
Did you have dances?
we had school dances, yeah. A lot of the kids went in couples if they were dating. The rest of us just went as a group, which was kind of a nuisance because we had to wear long dresses and everything, and you felt kind of dumb going to a high school dance in a long dress by yourself, you know. So they weren't a whole lot of fun.
No. What?
Most of the boys at that age didn't ask a girl out. If they didn't go specifically with somebody, they didn't ask. They just went as a group.
Yep. Okay. You mentioned when you were done eating, you could dance in the
gym.
gym. Was that something that happened often?
That was at junior high school.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. Because in high school, we had a regular gym on a big gym with, there was a curtain that they would pull down the middle, and the girls would be on one side and the boys on the other if it was a gym activity. But if it was a social activity, then they'd just use the whole gym, and they'd have dances there too. But the ones that I was talking about in the basement was in junior high school. So do you want to know about the junior high or
Yeah,
high
I'm just,
school?
what kind of, I was just trying to get to what kind of dancing did you do when you were younger?
Oh, let's see. What did we do? We had started to jitterbug at that point. And so it was individual kind of dancing, you know. It wasn't...
But like jitterbugging is like the flips and all that kind of stuff, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
It's just moving around, you know, and that kind of thing to the music. Dancing that you could do just with a bunch of girls, you know. It didn't have to be a couple.
Did you grow up knowing how to like waltz and...
Yeah, waltz and foxtrot.
How did you learn that?
I think probably Kay taught me, because I knew how to do that. I didn't know how to jitterbug and do some of those fancy dances. We didn't do line dances back then.
Did you learn how to jitterbug?
Yes, I learned. How did I learn? I learned I probably learned at Mill's house because Mill had an older sister who would have taught her, and then Mill would teach me.
Did you enjoy dancing?
Yeah, I like dancing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you have much homework when you were in school?
Quite a bit. We had homework on every subject. And taking mostly an hour with each one.
Where did you do your homework?
I did my homework at the dining room table
So by yourself?
by myself, yep.
Eating after dinner, before dinner, after school?
If nothing else was going on, I would do it after school. If I had some errands to do or someplace else to be, then I would do it in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried not to, because by that time I was tiresome. I wasn't about to want to sit down and do homework. And of course, everything had to be done by pen and ink or pencil or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd have a page of math things to do, writing an essay for English and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is probably no different than you had. I hated homework.
I don't know anybody that really likes it. When you look back at what you were like in school,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like you were a completely different person than, you know, what you were like in your 30s or your 50s? Or were you pretty much the same person that you are now?
No, I think I changed a lot. I wasn't outgoing enough in high school or, in school, which I should have been. I think it's helpful if you push yourself a little bit, and I never did. I sort of receded into the woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got out of school and was working, I had more self-confidence, and I could stand up for myself. I could express my ideas and things like that. And I wish I'd been able to do that in school,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't.
What do you think gave you that confidence later?
I don't know, maybe being in the business world and knowing what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Helped. And then I had good bosses at Van Sanders. Only it was Mass Distributors before then. But they had confidence in me, which gave me confidence in myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. And it's a smaller environment, so that you do your work and somebody else does their work, and you don't get caught up in rivalries.
Mm-hmm. So you said you took business classes in school. How did you kind of know that's what you were going to do when you got out of school? Did you ever think about going to college? Were there other career paths or options that you considered?
No, there was mostly a case of either you were going to college and therefore you took the college courses, or you weren't going to college and you took the business courses. And I knew I wasn't going to college.
Why?
Because I wasn't going to, wouldn't have the money to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore I knew I was going to be going out to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took business courses. I took shorthand and typing, and my English courses were geared for business, and every course that I took was geared for business. And because I knew that's where I was going to be.
Were there other trades that other kids did other than like secretarial stuff other girls did that didn't go to college, or was that a pretty, you either did this or that?
Most of them.
What did your friends do? Did they all take the secretarial path, Mill and Evie and Mary?
No, most of them took the college course, but went into business afterwards. So, but I didn't go that route.
Yep.
And I don't know whether they benefited by it or not. I know Mill took Latin and all this kind of stuff, and yet she went to work at a mill in Reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what good the Latin did her,
Yep.
or geometry or any of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did just as well taking a business English course, and Evie was the same way. Evie took the college course, and then she went to work in an insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever.
Mm-hmm. So, did any of your friends go to college?
Not close friends. Some of those that I was telling you about that were cheerleaders and that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
they all went on to college because mostly their families had money.
Yep.
And we lived on the west side of town. But of my close friends, Mary didn't go to college. What did Mary do? I know Evie went to work for an insurance company.
Doing what kind of stuff?
Evie, I think secretarial.
Okay.
And Mill the same way. She went to work for good old Sanford in Reading.
What were they?
They made plastic for automobiles.
Mm-hmm.
Rusty worked for them too. And so did Peggy, Mill's sister. Because it was right across the railroad tracks from where they lived, so it was very easy.
Did you have any jobs during high school?
Yes, I worked at Grant's as a sales clerk.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you started that?
Oh, probably 15. Mill went to work for the 5 and 10 for Woolworths.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to work for Grant's.
Did you work mostly weekends or after school?
A little of both, mostly weekends, but I did do some after school. I didn't do a whole lot of that because then I had to walk home and I needed to get home before dark.
Yeah.
So I would do a little after school, after school work, but mostly weekends.
So were you there pretty much until you graduated?
Yeah, I was. And it was good. It was good training.
Mm-hmm.
And they liked me, and I did well there. I did some stocking of shelves and things like that. We always, before we went home, we had to, people would come in and they'd pick up all kinds of things like underpants and socks and things like that, and then just drop them, and go on to something else.
Yep.
And we had to straighten all those out before we went home.
Yep.
So I used to hate people after a while.
Do you have any recollection of how much you made?
Don't, Kim, I'm sorry. I'm sure it wasn't much, but I really have no idea.
You talk a lot about walking places. Did you have a bike?
No, I never had a bike. I had wanted a bike when I was down in the lower grades.
Right.
And I guess they couldn't afford to get me one because I didn't have it. And then when I was up in high school and Daddy told me I could have a bike, I didn't want one at that point because none of my friends had bikes. So I wanted a record player. And so finally, much to his chagrin, he got me a record player. But I don't think he ever quite got over the fact that after all those years, when I had wanted a bike for so long, I finally didn't want one.
Was graduation from high school a big deal? Was there like a party and was all of your family there?
Yeah, all of my family was there. It was in the football field at the junior high school because the high school didn't have a football field. So we had it there. The girls all wore white dresses And the boys, for the most part, wore white slacks and navy blue jackets.
Mhm.
And we marched around the football field, and the high school band played.
Was it a big day for you, or yeah?
Just getting out of school was a big day for most of us.
Yep.
And yeah, no, we enjoyed
Were
it.
there parties after with your friends?
See, I think I went home with my family. I don't know what some of the others did.
Yep.
They may have gone to parties or whatever, but I went home with Stell and Kay and Mom. I don't know whether Daddy was there or not. I can't remember. Probably not. He was probably at work.
And then where did you have a job when you graduated? Did you know where you were going, or were you still working at Grants?
No, I was, when I graduated, I was all through at Grants. One of the neighbors that I used to babysit for, they had twin boys who were hellas. Oh, God. I see one of them all the time now, and I keep reminding him what a bugger he was.
Where do you see him?
Down the store. He comes in to buy liquor. And so, and he knows me, so we chat about it. His twin brother lives up in Canada, so I don't see him, but I do this one. And so anyway, I used to, while I was in high school too, I used to babysit evenings when they'd go out somewhere. I would babysit the two boys. Did I ever tell you about the time they locked me out in the rain?
No.
I'm telling you, they were buggers. But well, this one night it was raining, and one of the twins ran out the door. And when I went out to try and catch him to bring him back inside,
About how old would he have been? Like,
they would have been probably about 5 or 6.
okay.
The one that was the Holy Terror that now lives up in Canada, so I can't get my hands on him. He waited until his brother came around the house to the door, pulled him inside, and then locked the door. And I'm outside in the pouring rain, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? If the folks ever come home and find me outside and them inside, I'm in deep trouble. But they eventually let me in. I think they figured they were in for a whole lot of trouble if they didn't. I was in for a whole lot of trouble, but they were worse. So anyway, Mr. Chadwick, he worked for an insurance company. Columbia Casualty and Ocean Accident, it was 2 different policy-like things, companies together.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, he said he would get me a job. So he called some people in the company. He had a fairly good job there. And so a little while later, a few days later, he called and he said, if you want to come to work there, they were on Devonshire Street, and he said, you can ride back and forth with me.
So Devonshire Street in Boston?
Yes. Yeah, because I wasn't too sure if I wanted to go to work in Boston, if I had to take the train all the time and that kind of thing. He said, you can ride with me. So that that worked out fine, and I worked there for almost a year. And then, how did I get? distributors. I turn it off for a minute, I gotta think. So then Mr. Chadwick said to me at one point when we were driving into Boston, he asked me how much I was making, and I said $12 a week, and he said, "Is that all?" And I said, "Yes, that's all." And he said, "Oh, I think we can do better than that." And so he put me in touch with Mr. Foster at Mass Distributors, it was at that point, which was a brokerage firm. And so I went and saw him, and they hired me.
So this was a different company
It was a different company.
from what he worked at. He just knew somebody.
Yes, he
So
just.
he was just looking out for you. He wasn't
Yes.
looking out for his, it wasn't doing better within his company.
No,
Yep.
his company was insurance,
Yep.
automobile insurance and life insurance, and this was brokerage
Yep.
and financial. And so anyway, Mr. Foster hired me, and I went to work for him. Got along fine. He was a nice man. I liked him a lot.
Were you his personal secretary? Or?
Yes. Yeah. And
So do you remember how much you were making then?
they raised me to $15
A week?
a week, so from 12 to 15.
That's a big...
So that was a step in the right direction. Not a big step, just a baby step, but it was a step in the right direction.
Was that, pretty good money at the time? Comparable to what other people were making? Your friends or whatever?
Probably not at that particular point, but it figured that it would
Get there.
it would get there.
Yeah.
At this point, it was pretty good because it only cost $2 to ride the train for a week. So even with that amount of money, I paid my mother and father $7 a week board, and I paid the electric light bill each month.
Mhm.
And I bought my own clothes.
Yep.
And I had my train fare and everything.
Yep.
So $15 in those days went a pretty good distance.
Yep.
And it got better as time went on. And
So how long did you work there?
from Mass Distributors, about 45 years.
So that eventually became Eaton Vance.
And it became Eden Vance.
How long did you work for that first?
Excuse me, I have to backtrack.
Okay.
After that, it became Vance Sanders and Company.
Okay.
And it wasn't until after I left that it became Eden Vance.
Okay.
Because Eaton was one of the officers of Mass Investors Trust, which was one of the stocks that we handled. And so that's how that became
Mm-hmm.
Eden Vance.
Okay.
But that was after it became Vance Sanders.
Okay.
Am I with you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I'm with you.
All right.
So did you work as I forget his name for that man? As that man?
Hatherley Foster.
Did you work for him for a long time?
Yes, I worked for him until he retired. Back over and see when I actually stopped working for him. But when he retired, then he brought over a man from State Street Bank and Trust called Louis Armistead, and to take his place, and I worked for Louis Armistead.
So we took a little break and we're just coming back, and we were talking about your job at Vance Sanders, is that what you called it most of the time?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, you mentioned you were the secretary for this one person until they retired.
Right.
Did you
He
have...
was the treasurer of the company.
Okay. Did you have varying levels of responsibility during that time, or...
Yeah, I dictation from him to answer his letters, but we also, like, if somebody asked him for literature or material or things on the funds, it was my responsibility to send them out and to send them wherever the person happened to be. Now, we had wholesale salesmen who would go out on the road and call in and they'd say, Neil, send me 50 copies of Brevet's issue number 24 or something like that, and send them to me here. But I have to make sure that they're going to get here by next Tuesday, that kind of thing. And I would do that. And the rest was just normal stuff that a secretary would do.
Do you have a sense how long, just roughly how long, was it 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, or was it the bulk of your time there, or no, that you were his secretary?
Well, I worked for Vance Sanders for a total of 40, I think it was 43 years. But the last part of it was not for Mr. Foster because he was ill and had to retire. So before he retired, he went to State Street Bank in Boston and brought over a friend of his from there by the name of Louis Armistead. And so I worked for Louis until I left.
Did you enjoy being a secretary?
I enjoyed working for Mr. Foster. I wasn't thrilled working for Louis Armistead.
Why not?
Because he was someone who came in late, didn't do the work that he was supposed to do. He'd just hand me a whole bunch of letters and say, here, answer these. And so I'd get a little annoyed at him. He was a lot of fun, and he had a good sense of humor and everything, but work-wise, he wasn't the greatest.
Gotcha. I can picture the kind. Did you have a lot of friends there?
Well, in a small company like we had, everybody's either your friend or your enemy. Yeah, I mean, they were as close of friends as you'd have. Probably about a half a dozen of the girls were really close friends. We'd go shopping. We'd stay in town and go to a show and things like that. But then there were others that you'd say hi to, and they'd say hi to you, and you'd know what was going on in their life, but you really didn't call them close.
Did, was Boston, working in Boston, was it a big part of, I'm not sure how to say this, did you feel like you knew Boston, like that was a big part of where you hung out, or did you just go in and work and come home for the most part?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I felt that I knew as much as I needed to know about Boston.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't spend a whole lot of time there, other than to stay in to go to a sporting event or a movie or go shopping or whatever. So that, other than that, I really didn't care that much about Boston.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever think of leaving there to go elsewhere? You stayed there for a really long time. What kept you there?
I kept getting more and more money. That was one thing. And basically, I built up vacation time.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you worked 4 years, I think we got 3 weeks vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And then for each year after that, you got another day added on. When those of us who worked there before they planned all this vacation time, we got 10 weeks vacation.
Wow.
Well, we earned it.
Right, no, that's good.
Yeah, and so they gave it to us to compensate for the fact that up until all those years that we worked, we didn't get more than a couple of weeks vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And people who were coming into work were starting out getting 3 and 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So that's how they made it up to us.
Yep. So you pretty much, because you were happy enough there and you were getting
I was
more
getting
money
good vacation time and good money, and I had not prestige, but I mean I had the point where I knew what I was doing and nobody bothered me and I would do my work.
Yep.
So it was worthwhile. I didn't want to start out with a new firm.
Yep. Did you feel like if you hadn't been a woman, you would have had more responsibility or, had a different role within the company?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Women were really second-class citizens in there. When new jobs came along or when somebody should have been promoted, it was not me or any of the other girls. It was the guys that were promoted. Van Sanders was not an equal opportunity employer back then.
Yep.
Unfortunately, because they were good in other things. But nobody was doing it. None of the firms, the banks and things like that, none of them were doing it. So it wasn't just them.
Right.
So.
What kind of jobs do you think you would have gotten or been interested in had they been open to you?
Oh, I think I could have been a department head. And toward the end, I was to the point where, when Mr. Foster got sick and had to retire, and Louis Armistead was doing other work, I was almost like running the department. They would give me the mail that would come in that had to do with us, and I would compose the letters and write them. And that I enjoyed a lot. The only trouble is women are tough on women. And when I had things that I needed to put off onto somebody else, another girl or whatever, to look up something like that, they didn't like it.
Mm.
They wouldn't have argued with a guy. They'd have just done it.
Mm-hmm.
But with me, they would argue and say, that's not my job, I'm not going to do that. So women, a lot of what women don't do is their problem. A lot of what they don't get is their problem.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Women could make things a lot easier for themselves.
For themselves or for each other?
For each other. And I think that this is a lot of the reason that women don't get advanced, is because if they rely on other women to help them out or to do some of the legwork and things like that, never happen. If it's them, they'll do it, but they won't do it for another woman. I don't know, has that changed?
Yeah, I don't feel that way. But there are obviously still issues, but yeah, some of my best employees are women.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that things are changing or have changed, because they weren't before.
Yep.
There was a lot of jealousy between women.
Anything else about your career, your time at Eaton Vance? We'll kind of get back into it a little bit later, but anything that you wanted to mention or...
You mean about Van Sanders?
Yep.
No, not really. As the higher ups started getting older, things changed for them too. Some of them died off. Some of them just, they'd bring younger people into the firm, and the older ones would retire, that kind of thing. But I think that happens in every firm too.
All right, let's move on to topics. How old were you when World War II started?
I was 17. The first thing I remember was Pearl Harbor was bombed, and all the ships were devastated, and there were thousands of people killed. It was just horrendous.
How did it impact people close to you, like going into the military?
A lot of people that I knew from school were enlisting. My brother Bud was called up in the draft. Kay's husband George, I think he was called up too in the draft. Everything was messed up. I mean, people didn't know what caused it. They didn't know whether we were going to be bombed next. It was just, nobody could get over it. They couldn't believe that somebody had done this to us.
Did September 11th bring any of those feelings back? Did it feel similar?
Yeah, I think it did. It scared me, and I'm sure it scared a lot of people who lived through World War II. Because you didn't know how far it was going to go. And the numbers of people that were killed was the same in World War II. And at Pearl Harbor, there were so many. It was bad.
Yep. So you mentioned Bud was called up. How do you remember how Nana and your father felt?
Nervous. Because there was so much going on in Europe, not only in the Pacific, but in Europe. And Bud was called up to go to Italy. And of course, Italy was run by a dictator called Mussolini. And so everybody was pretty insecure.
Did you write to many people, many servicemen?
I wrote to Bud. I wrote to Bosty when he was called up. I wrote to George. A couple of, like my cousin Arthur, who was in the Navy, and a friend of his. I wasn't a great letter writer, but I wrote.
Did you save any of the letters?
Not that I wrote. I have some that they wrote. I have a few of those.
Did you ever hear any news on the radio that you thought would directly affect somebody that you knew about a battle and think that somebody was probably there?
I think the one I was most concerned about was Bev, because he was in Germany and we knew that he had been taken prisoner and was in a concentration camp. So we were pretty nervous about him. I mean, not that we weren't concerned, but he was, as far as we knew, was fine.
Mistake.
Whereas Bev, we knew wasn't.
Did anyone that you knew closely either was missing in action or died in the war?
Oh, there was a lot that I went to school with that died, because they had gone in very young. We didn't know about all of them at the time, but we found out afterwards. Notices would come through the paper with a list of people of casualties, and you'd scan that looking for names that you knew.
Was the war a daily reminder, always there? Did you listen to the radio every day? Was that your main source of information?
Oh, I think we listened every night to Walter Cronkite, and he would give the news from the different sections, and how many people were killed. He didn't always list the names. It was more like your local papers that listed the names and things.
What was life? What were some of the changes in, at the home front? Was there rationing? How were?
Yeah, there was rationing. We didn't get. We had coupon books, and you could turn in these little stamps to get meat, to get like sugar and flour, and the stamps would last just so long, and when those were gone, tough. But we didn't have a big family, so it worked out fairly well for us. But some people had a real rough time if they had a lot of small children.
So that the number of people in your family didn't affect the number of coupons that you got?
Yeah, it did to a point, but I don't think it was fair.
Yeah. Did you have air raid drills?
I think we would have had the war touched the mainland, but it didn't.
Tell me what you remember about the war ending.
Well, I was up in Hambury, and two other girls, Betty Sullivan and Eileen Miller. We had a cottage up there, and when the war ended,
E-Day or BJ?
well, both of them, but VE Day to begin with was the first one. And we were in a restaurant up there, sitting and eating, And all of a sudden, people came pouring out into the street, and they were yelling and hollering. And at first we didn't know what it was all about and what was happening. And then finally somebody said, "It's all over, the war is over." But that was VE Day. VJ Day was still to come. And but as I say, everybody was out in the street. They left their tables and everything. We went out into the street, and everybody was kissing everybody. And it was really something to behold. It really was. It was fun.
Do you remember VJ Day? Or?
Yeah, I remember VJ Day too, but that was sort of an anticlimax after the other one. VJ Day. I'm not sure where I was at VJ Day.
That's fun.
I'd like to think I was back up in Hampton, because I've got a whole bunch of pictures and stuff where we were celebrating. We'd wrap toilet paper around our heads and everything, but that may have been VJ Day, and maybe VE Day was quieter than I remember.
Do you remember people coming home? Do you remember Bud coming home? Do you remember George coming home?
Yeah, I remember both of that. I remember Bud coming home. I remember Rusty coming home. Bev, I think, was home. It took a while for him to get home, where he was incarcerated.
Yeah.
He and Kay had lived, they were living, when Bev went into service, they were living in Ipswich. So we didn't see, him when he first came home. But Bud lived in Reading, so we saw him.
Were there big parties? Was it a big event?
When the boys came home, oh yeah, they had parades and all that kind of thing. Yeah, it was a big thing. See, there's so much more. You can't encapsulate it in a few words.
Yeah.
But every little town, as the boys were coming home, had parades for them. And you couldn't help but be excited about it. And some of them, it took longer to come home than others, because I think they rotated a lot of them home. They had to have a certain number of points and things to come home. And the first ones that had the most points and things, they came home first, because there was a lot of cleaning up and everything that had to be done. And so, as I say, some came home quicker than others.